Close your eyes. Rewind the relentless gears of time. Travel back to an era where the world was chained to absolute pitch-black darkness, suffocating under the heavy scent of soot, whale oil, and flickering candlelight. We are journeying to a terrifying, tempestuous night in July of 1856 in a tiny, forgotten village at the edge of the Austrian Empire. The sky was roaring as if it wanted to punish the earth. Lightning ripped the heavens in half, illuminating the jagged mountains with a violent, electric blue glare. On that night, at the exact peak of the storm's fury, inside a small, fragile stone house, a baby boy was brought into the world. The midwife, trembling with superstitious terror as thunder shook the very foundations of the room, wrapped the fragile infant in a cloth. She looked at the flashing sky, then at the exhausted mother, and whispered in absolute dread, "This storm is a bad omen. This child will be a child of darkness." But the mother, holding her newborn, looked down into his eyes that held an inexplicable, unearthly, piercing spark. She slowly shook her head, defying the thunder, defying the superstitions, and uttered a prophecy that would alter the course of human history forever. No, he will be a child of light. In this fairy tale, there are no knights wielding blood-stained swords. There are no emperors marching vast iron-clad armies into the jaws of death, nor are there armadas crossing furious oceans to conquer new lands. This is a different kind of epic. This is the tragic, magnificent saga of a modern Prometheus, a mortal who reached his bare hands into the heavens, caught the lightning, stole the fire of the gods, and gifted it to humanity. Turn off all the lights. Let the shadows swallow the room. Listen only to the electric, intoxicating, hypnotic rhythm of these words. Before you lies the story of the purest, most breathtaking genius history has ever witnessed, and how he was ruthlessly, brutally ground into dust between the unforgiving gears of human greed. Welcome to the tragedy of Nikola Tesla and the theft of light. Part I. The mind of a god in a mortal shell, 0 to 230. Imagine standing in a pitch-black room. You can see absolutely nothing. An ordinary human being in that darkness feels only blinding fear and disorientation. But when a young Nikola Tesla looked into the void, he did not see emptiness. He saw spinning gears, sparking coils, hovering geometric shapes, and invisible, majestic rivers of magnetic force. He was cursed and blessed with a mind that defied the boundaries of human biology. When an idea struck him, it was accompanied by blinding flashes of light that would physically pain him. He did not need ink or paper to invent. If he wanted to build a machine, he built it entirely within the vast, infinite universe of his own imagination. He would construct the motor in his mind, turn it on, let it run for months inside his head, and then dismantle it mentally to check which invisible parts had suffered from friction and wear. He was the only mortal on Earth who could hear the silent, magnificent, mathematical music of the universe. But pure, unadulterated intellect is never enough to survive the brutal realities of this world. In fact, without a shield, genius is nothing but prey. One evening in Budapest, while walking through a park and reciting Goethe's Faust from memory, the ultimate revelation struck him like a physical blow. He froze. With a stick, he began drawing furiously in the dirt. In that exact moment, he had solved the greatest scientific puzzle of his era, the rotating magnetic field. He had just invented the alternating current AC motor. It was a system that could transmit electrical power across hundreds of miles without losing energy. It was the key to lighting up the entire globe. But a vision in the dirt of a park is meaningless unless you can forge it in steel. To bring this godlike vision to life, he needed to travel to the center of the modern world. He needed a master, a patron, a kingdom of industry. Part 2. The Belly of the Beast and the Wizard of Menlo Park, 2:30–5:30. It was a foggy, suffocating morning in 1884. A tall, impossibly thin young man in his late 20s stood on the deck of a swaying ship, stepping off onto the muddy, chaotic, money-drenched shores of the New World, New York City. During the voyage, his tickets and money had been stolen. He arrived in America with exactly 4 cents in his pocket, a few pages of handwritten poetry, a design for a flying machine, and a mind that held the secrets of the cosmos. New York was a sprawling, roaring, terrifying monster. It was a city where wealth, ruthless ambition, capitalism, and thick black coal smoke blended into a suffocating fog. His steps led him straight to the court of the reigning king of electricity, the so-called Wizard of Menlo Park, Thomas Alva Edison. When these two titans met in that soot-stained, heavily guarded laboratory, it was not just a meeting of inventors. It was the ignition of an ancient, eternal war. It was the clash between the honor of pure science and the ruthless mercantilism of capitalism. Edison was a genius, yes, but he was far less of an inventor and far more of a ruthless, brilliant businessman. In Edison's world, if a scientific discovery could not be instantly monetized and sold for a massive profit, it was completely worthless. Edison relied on brute force, trial and error, and the sweat of his underlings. Tesla relied on divine inspiration, flawless mathematics, and elegant theory. When the young Serbian immigrant passionately explained his grand vision of alternating current, a system that could power the world from a single waterfall, Edison scoffed inwardly. Edison had already invested millions of dollars in his own direct current DC system. DC was weak. It was incredibly inefficient. It required a loudly humming, coal-burning power plant on every single city block, just to light a few wealthy homes. But it had one supreme advantage. It belonged to Edison. And Edison was not about to let a penniless immigrant threaten his empire. However, Edison was a shark. He smelled the unparalleled brilliance radiating from the young man. He decided to exploit it. Part 3. The American Sense of Humor and the First Betrayal. 5:30, 8:30. Fairy tales often begin with the purity of a hero, but they are invariably forged by the cruelty of the world. Edison looked at the young, starry-eyed Tesla and made him a proposition. Edison's own DC generators on the ships in the harbor were constantly breaking down, causing massive financial losses. He looked Tesla dead in the eye and said, "If you can redesign my entire system and make these machines work efficiently, there is $50,000 in it for you." $50,000. In the 1880s, that was an unfathomable fortune, the equivalent of millions today. For Tesla, this was not just money. This was the golden ticket to building his AC motor, to realizing his lifelong dream. He accepted. Tesla worked like a man possessed by demons. He did not sleep. He forgot to eat. The days blurred into the nights. He worked from 10:30 in the morning until 5 the next morning, every single day for months on end. Those delicate, miraculous hands that held the codes of the universe were covered in thick black grease, oil, rust, and grime. He would often collapse from sheer exhaustion directly on his workbench, only to wake up an hour later and continue redesigning Edison's flawed machines. And then, the impossible happened. Tesla succeeded. He flawlessly redesigned 24 different types of standard machines for Edison, replacing the old, inefficient designs with elegant, perfectly functioning systems. He had saved Edison's company, securing its dominance, and saving it untold fortunes. With the innocent, triumphant smile of a child presenting a gift, Tesla walked into Edison's opulent office. He asked for his rightful reward. He asked for the $50,000 so he could finally begin his own work. Edison leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He slowly brought a thick cigar to his lips, struck a match, and took a long, deep drag. Through the heavy, suffocating cloud of blue smoke, Edison delivered one of the most chilling, soulless, and devastating smiles in the history of business. "Tesla," Edison chuckled, his voice dripping with condescension, "you simply don't understand our American sense of humor." It was a joke. The promised millions, the grandiose words spoken behind closed doors. It was all a spectacular, cynical lie to squeeze the maximum amount of free labor out of a brilliant, naive immigrant. Edison offered him nothing but a measly $10 raise to his weekly salary. In that very second, something inside Nikola Tesla's heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The flawless, frictionless gears spinning inside his mind violently halted in the face of this ugly, putrid display of human corruption. Tesla understood the laws of thermodynamics, the secrets of electromagnetism, and the frequencies of the earth, but he was completely, tragically, blind to the dark, Treacherous rules, written by the greed of men. His pride was absolute. Without uttering another word, he refused the raise, took his coat, slammed the door, and walked out of Edison's empire. But the world does not respect pride. The world bows only to leverage and capital. After abandoning Edison, the greatest genius the planet had ever seen found himself entirely destitute. For the next year, through the freezing, unforgiving New York winter, Nikola Tesla dug ditches in the muddy streets for $2 a day just to avoid starving to death. Those delicate, miraculous hands blistered, bled, and calloused as he swung a heavy iron pickaxe into the frozen earth. The mind that was destined to illuminate the globe was trapped in a filthy boarding house, battling starvation, depression, and absolute humiliation. This was the first, most brutal lesson of the system. If your genius is not protected by the cunning of a merchant, that genius is destined to dig ditches for the profit of others. Part IV. The War of the Currents and the Campaign of Terror, 8:30, 11:30. But fire, no matter how deeply it is buried beneath the ashes, will eventually burn the forest down the moment it catches the wind. During those dark, starving days in the mud, word of Tesla's miraculous AC motor reached the ears of another titan of industry, George Westinghouse. Westinghouse was a fierce capitalist, but unlike Edison, he was an engineer who could actually see the distant, glowing future shining in Tesla's eyes. The two men shook hands. Westinghouse bought Tesla's patents, and finally, the colossal generators and frictionless motors that had been spinning inside Tesla's mind for years began to materialize in solid iron and copper. Electricity could now be transmitted for hundreds of miles at incredibly high voltages and step down safely to light up homes far away from the power plant. It was cheap, it was brilliant, and it was flawless. The world was preparing to be baptized in the white light pouring from Tesla's mind. When Thomas Edison realized that his inefficient DC empire was about to be obliterated by Tesla's superior AC system, he did not respond with better science. He responded by activating the terrifying, disgusting machinery of corporate propaganda. The conflict that followed would be etched into history as the War of the Currents. It was a brutal, merciless psychological war. Edison knew he could not beat Tesla in a laboratory, so he attacked him in the newspapers. He weaponized the greatest vulnerability of the human masses, the primal fear of death. Edison began organizing horrific public spectacles. He paid local schoolboys to steal stray dogs and cats off the streets of New York. In front of horrified reporters and flashing cameras, Edison's men would strap these innocent animals to metal plates and electrocute them using Tesla's alternating current. The animals would fry, smoke, and die in agony. Edison even orchestrated the public execution of a magnificent, abused circus elephant named Topsy, sending 6,600 volts of AC electricity through her massive body, killing her instantly in front of a cheering, terrified crowd. This is what Tesla's system is. The newspapers screamed, funded by Edison's deep pockets, "If you let this murderous current into your homes, it will burn your wives and children to a crisp. It is the current of death." The peak of this absolute darkness came when Edison secretly funded and designed the first ever electric chair for the state of New York, specifically ensuring it ran on Westinghouse and Tesla's alternating current. He wanted the public to associate Tesla's brilliant invention with the gruesome execution of criminals. When the first inmate, William Kemmler, was strapped into the chair, the execution was a botched, horrific nightmare. The man was essentially roasted alive for 8 minutes, his flesh burning, the smell of cooked blood filling the room. And Edison? He gave triumphant interviews to the press, coining the term that criminals were now being Westinghoused. Your opponent was a man who did not hesitate to torture animals, burn men alive, and manipulate the minds of millions just to protect his profit margins. And how did Tesla respond to this psychological terrorism? He simply stayed in his laboratory, working quietly, romantically believing that the truth will eventually prevail. It is the fatal, tragic illusion of the intellectual, the belief that pure science and pure goodness will naturally defeat pure malice. Part V. The White City and the God of Light, 11:30, 14. The year was 1893. The The stage was the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition, the greatest display of human achievement the world had ever seen. The bidding war to illuminate the massive fairgrounds was fierce, but Westinghouse and Tesla won the contract, severely undercutting Edison. What happened on the opening night of that fair was a monumental fracture in human history, a moment that would never, ever be forgotten. As the sun set, hundreds of thousands of people stood in the massive neoclassical courtyards, shrouded in total darkness. And then, President Grover Cleveland pressed a single golden button. In a fraction of a second, the night was violently torn in half. The darkness was banished, exiled forever. Over 100,000 incandescent bulbs flared to life simultaneously. The colossal, magnificent, white city was washed in a blinding, majestic ocean of white light. The crowds gasped in sheer terror and absolute awe. Women fainted. Grown men fell to their knees on the damp grass, weeping openly. They were witnessing the death of the night. Mankind had finally conquered the dark. And there, standing in the center of the exhibition hall, was the architect of this miracle. Nikola Tesla stood on a raised platform, dressed in white tie and a black tailcoat, looking less like an engineer and more like a celestial deity. To prove that Edison's claims about the deadly alternating current were lies, Tesla performed a feat of unfathomable courage. Wearing shoes with thick cork soles, he allowed 1 million volts of high-frequency electricity to pass directly through his own body. Blue and violet lightning bolts erupted from his hair, his shoulders, and his fingertips. He held a glass tube in his bare hands, completely unconnected to any wires, and the electricity flowing through his flesh illuminated the tube like a magic sword. He was engulfed in a halo of crackling, divine fire. The crowd was paralyzed in a state of absolute hypnosis. Edison's lies were instantly pulverized beneath the undeniable, blinding truth of those lightning bolts. Tesla had won the war of the currents. From that night forward, the entire globe, from the massive roaring turbines at Niagara Falls to the smallest reading lamp in a child's bedroom, would be powered by the mind of Nikola Tesla. According to his royalty contract with Westinghouse, Tesla was entitled to receive $2.50 for every single horsepower of alternating current sold. With the world rapidly electrifying, that single piece of paper was about to make Nikola Tesla the wealthiest human being to ever walk the face of the earth. He was going to eclipse the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the Vanderbilts. He was going to have the infinite financial power to build every single dream in his mind. But capitalism never surrenders. It simply changes its tactics. Part V. The Fatal Romanticism and the Torn Paper, 1416. Shortly after the victory at Niagara Falls, George Westinghouse arrived at Tesla's laboratory, looking pale, exhausted, and utterly defeated. The massive expansion, the brutal price wars with Edison, and the panic of 1890 had brought the Westinghouse Electric Company to the absolute brink of bankruptcy. The Wall Street bankers who were financing the company looked at Tesla's royalty contract and balked. They told Westinghouse, "As long as you have to pay this man millions of dollars in royalties, we will not give you another dime. You must break his contract, or the company will go under." Westinghouse looked Tesla in the eyes and pleaded, "If you do not give up this contract, Tesla, my company will be liquidated. Your AC system will fall into the hands of our enemies, and your dream of electrifying the world will die right here." Stop for a moment and think. What would an ordinary, ruthless businessman do in this scenario? He would call an army of vicious lawyers. He would demand equity in the company. He would restructure the deal, seize control of the board, and extract every single drop of blood he was owed. But Tesla looked at the contract on his desk. He picked up the piece of paper. He did not see it as a financial instrument. He saw it as a shackle, holding back the progress of humanity. He looked at Westinghouse, the only man who had believed in him when he was digging ditches. Without blinking, without a second of hesitation, the smartest man in the world took the contract that would have made him the world's first billionaire and tore it to shreds. He threw it in the trash. "Mr. Westinghouse," Tesla said softly, "you have been my friend. You believed in me. The benefits of alternating current belong to humanity. I will not let my royalties destroy your company." It was a moment of supreme, godlike altruism. It was breathtakingly noble. It was pure romance. And it was the most catastrophic, fatal, and utterly foolish strategic mistake of his entire life. By tearing up that contract, Tesla thought he was sacrificing his wealth for the good of humanity. What he failed to realize was that he was violently stripping himself of his armor. He was throwing away the very capital, the very weapon he desperately needed to protect his future inventions from the wolves that were circling in the shadows. He had disarmed himself on a battlefield where no one else plays by the rules of honor. Part V. Wardenclyffe and the Master of Coin. 16. As the 1900s dawned, Tesla's mind expanded beyond the confines of this planet. Transmitting electricity through thick copper wires was now child's play to him. He was looking at the Earth itself, realizing it was a giant conductor. He dreamed of transmitting not just information, but infinite free electrical energy wirelessly through the air and the ground to every single corner of the globe. He moved to Long Island, New York, and began constructing a monstrous skeletal wooden tower that rose 187 feet into the sky, topped with a massive 55-ton steel hemisphere. This was the Wardenclyffe Tower. The plan was majestic. Utilizing the resonant frequencies of the Earth, the tower would pump immense amounts of energy into the ground and the ionosphere. A man in the deepest, most remote village in Africa could simply stick a metal rod into the dirt and receive free, unlimited electrical power to light his home and run his machines. To build this colossal dream, Tesla needed immense funding. He went to the apex predator of American capitalism, the god of money himself, J.P. Morgan. Morgan was the embodiment of the monopoly. He was a man who bought governments and swallowed industries whole. Initially, Morgan gave Tesla $150,000, believing the tower was simply going to be used to transmit wireless radio messages across the Atlantic to compete with Marconi. But Tesla, driven by that dangerous, naive scientific excitement, sat across from Morgan's massive mahogany desk and confessed his true, ultimate vision. "It is not just for voice messages, Mr. Morgan." Tesla beamed, his eyes wide with the dream of a utopian future. "We will transmit power. We will give the entire world free, unlimited energy. No more wires, no more coal, no more darkness." A terrifying, absolute silence descended upon the room. The glowing embers of J.P. Morgan's thick cigar illuminated his cold, reptilian eyes. Morgan did not care about utopian futures. Morgan did not care about freeing humanity from the burdens of labor. Morgan cared about control. Morgan cared about ledgers, monopolies, and profit margins. Morgan leaned forward, staring at the brilliant, naive scientist, and asked the darkest, most ruthless, and most defining question in the history of modern capitalism. "Mr. Tesla, if anyone can just stick a rod into the ground and get this energy for free, where do we put the meter? How do we charge them? Where do we put the meter?" That is the absolute summary of the system. Capitalism will never ever allow a dream to survive if it cannot be metered, packaged, monopolized, and sold. Morgan instantly withdrew all his funding. But he didn't stop there. Using his immense, terrifying influence over Wall Street, Morgan blacklisted Tesla. He ensured that no other bank, no other investor in the United States would give the inventor a single penny. The Wardenclyffe Tower, the most glorious, altruistic dream in human history, was starved to death. Construction halted. The massive gears rusted. Eventually, to pay off Tesla's mounting hotel debts, the government ordered the tower to be dynamited, torn apart, and sold for scrap metal. When that magnificent tower crashed into the dirt, Tesla's heart, his spirit, and his mind shattered with it. He had successfully decoded the most complex, guarded secrets of the universe, but he had catastrophically failed to decode the PIN code to J.P. Morgan's wallet. Part 5. The Pigeons and the Price of Immortality, 1830-2030. The years flowed by like a dark, unforgiving river. The world transformed. Skyscrapers touched the clouds, illuminated by his alternating current. Factories roared with his induction motors. The modern age, the 20th century, was entirely built upon the blood, sweat, and genius of Nikola Tesla. But the architect of the future was slowly sinking into absolute darkness. It is the winter of 1943, a freezing, bitter January night in New York City. Inside the faded, gloomy room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker, an 86-year-old man lies completely alone. He is utterly destitute, living on a meager pension paid by the Yugoslavian government just to keep him from starving in the streets. He had become a ghost, deeply terrified of human contact, crippled by severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. His only friends were the city pigeons. The miraculous hands that once tamed lightning bolts now trembled as they scattered seeds on the windowsill for the birds. He would spend hours talking to a specific white pigeon, believing it held the spirit of a profound, mystical love. The boundless universe that once resided in his magnificent mind was now painfully compressed within the four suffocating walls of a cheap hotel room. On the night of January 7th, his exhausted heart quietly stopped beating. Nikola Tesla, the god of light, the man who banished the darkness from the face of the earth, died in the dark. He died alone, impoverished, and deeply in debt. The men who attended his modest funeral possessed not even a fraction of the billions of dollars of wealth that had been generated by his patents. He left behind no wife, no children, and no financial empire. All that remained of the man who invented the 20th century were a few dusty trunks filled with faded blueprints and unpaid bills. Part X, The Brutal Ledger of Strategy, 2030-22. As you listen to this epic tragedy, a heavy, agonizing sorrow is likely crushing your chest. A massive knot of anger toward Edison, toward Morgan, toward the inherent cruelty of the world is probably burning in your throat. You say to yourself, how unfair the world is. How could they do this to someone so pure, so brilliant? Wipe your tears, put away the fairy tales, and look directly into the cold, unforgiving mirror of reality. The greatest culprit, the architect of this tragedy, is not Edison. It is not Morgan. It is Nikola Tesla himself. The system is not unfair. The system is merely mechanical. It is completely blind to your emotions, your purity, your good intentions, or your genius. The system enforces its own rules. If you, out of sheer romantic arrogance and the pride of pure science, tear up the contract that would have made you a billionaire, you have absolutely no right to cry when J.P. Morgan cuts your funding and tears down your tower. The money you needed to build your utopian dream was gone because you threw it in the trash years earlier. To survive in this world, intellect is the sheep, and strategy is the wolf that guards it. You may have the ability to solve the mathematical formulas of the universe, but if you cannot solve the American sense of humor thrown at you by a cunning merchant across the table, you are destined to dig ditches in the freezing mud for $2 a day. People place far too much blind faith in their talents, their education, and their inherent value. The belief that I am doing great work, and eventually the world will recognize my true worth, is the most lethal, pathetic, and foolish delusion in history. Your value is never recognized, naturally, unless you take a sledgehammer and smash your value onto the table using the ruthless dynamics of power and leverage. Your pure intellect will always, inevitably, become the enslaved capital of someone else's empire. There will always be an Edison trying to steal your labor. There will always be a Morgan asking, where do we put the meter? The world was like this 1,000 years ago. It is like this today, and it will be exactly like this 1,000 years from now. If you want to keep the brilliance inside you alive, if you want to actually build your projects and change your world, you cannot rely on romanticism. To protect your inner Tesla, you must become a strategist as ruthless as Edison and as cold-blooded as Morgan. Guard your intellect not with hope, but with absolute power. Otherwise, while your ideas light up the world, you will be the one dying alone in the pitch-black darkness of a hotel room, feeding the pigeons. The ledger is closed.